The start of 16 days of activism against gender-based violence in the country comes with somber news. Latest crime statistics announced yesterday by the Police Ministry revealed that an increase in GBV cases compared to the same quarter last year. Over 900 women were killed in the country between July and September. Newzroom Afrika's Nqobile Madlala is joining us. Nqobile, very good morning to you. This is a major issue, and you were there when the Deputy President, Paul Mashatile, was launching the campaign. And then later on, these stats then come out to indicate that there is an increase in gender-based violence. So we're going to, we seem to have a problem there with that line to Nqobile. We're going to see if we can re-establish that line. So, of course, yesterday it was the launch of the 16 days of activism against women and children abuse. Nqobile, so we've got you back on the line. We're saying that yesterday you were at the launch where the Deputy President was launching the 16 days of activism against women and child abuse. And this time, later on, we heard in the stats that were released by the Police Minister that there's actually been an increase in GBV cases.
A very sad state indeed, Aldrin, especially because when we were at the launch, you could hear from the Deputy President that he was saying that this is a fight that must be prioritized by everyone and that it's a responsibility of this nation to fight against GBV. But then to see the numbers also rising remains a concern, especially also again because they've said this is a war against GBV. And so what does this mean for the 365 days of fighting these cases? But of course in Johannesburg we've got this issue that's also affecting women on the ground. But what does this mean then for the shelters? And this is why I'm going to bring in Lisa to speak to us about this. Lisa, we've seen the issue of shelters, especially when it comes to funding, coming to light early this year as last year as well. But now we're seeing GBV cases rising as well. Is this a concern? What does this mean for shelters? Are they seeing more people coming in?
Well, that will depend on whether or not they have the funding to take people in, even if they're coming forward. So shelters did suffer a little bit of a setback, I think, because of their temporary closure as a result of their funding crises. So some of them are still trying to recover and get back to where they were. But they do get called constantly. There's the National Shelter Movement's helpline, which also places women in shelters, and they're seeing a lot of calls as well. We've also got to look, I think, at the statistics that nobody's really talking about, which the police do report on but don't get much airtime, and those are domestic violence statistics. So in the last 3 months, in the July to September period, the police recorded 30,000 different cases of crimes in the context of domestic violence. Everything from arson and rape all the way through to murder. So I think 30,000 in the space of 3 months tells you about the need for services, for some kind of intervention, the need to make funding available to ensure, whether it's at the police stations, whether it's a shelter, whether it's a counselling service, that help is available. Both for women and for those men who do acknowledge that they need some help with the way they behave.
I mean, Lisa, what does 16 days of activism obviously means that the country is fighting against this GBV. But what does this mean then for the country when we see this?
I think it should challenge us to think long and hard and very critically about what we're doing. Is it having the necessary effect that we want it to? And I would suggest possibly not. I mean, the 16 days at best raise awareness. That's all they can do. 16 days of placards, posters, launches, speeches, that doesn't change behaviour. Behaviour needs sustained, long-term supportive intervention. So it's about working on a 365-day basis, obvious as that sounds, and it's about not just doing things that are once-off, but are doing them consistently again and again and again. And it also means looking much more carefully. We speak nationally, but if you start looking at the statistics, you can see that the problems are different in different parts of the country. In some levels it's higher, in other levels it's lower. It also changes. So it means paying attention to what are the statistics telling us about the problem now? Where do we need to concentrate? And also, if we see that it's coming down in one area but going up in another area, can we compare the two to say what's different? What can we learn about how they may have decreased it here, but why it's increasing here? So I think it should really challenge us to do more than just have a speech, have a lunch, have a whatever, an event, and think rather about long-term intervention.
And what would then be your call to government in an effect that we have seen the numbers rising, especially from the side of the shelters?
Well, I think firstly they need to understand why are they rising. Is this just a temporary fluctuation, or are there increases in violence? Because you need to know what's driving it in order to do the right kind of intervention. So that would help us to know, where do we need more shelters, where do we need less shelters, what kinds of shelters are needed, do we need to, many women who come into shelters have not completed matric, they're solely dependent on child support grants. What kind of economic interventions are being put in place to ensure that they're not made vulnerable to abuse because of their economic dependence? So I think there'd be that kind of work. There'd be the kind of statistical analysis that I talked about, because we've really got to move away from a one-size-fits-all, and there's one solution, and if we can figure out what that one solution is, the problem is going to go away. It's not going to be that. So I think if we started taking a much more nuanced look and started contrasting, comparing, looking at what works, because some things are working in this country, and see what we can learn to also apply elsewhere.
Thank you very much for your time, Lisa. Aldrin very clearly stated there by Lisa that it's very important also to go towards those vulnerable groups and be able to empower them, because that in itself will also make a difference.
Thank you so much for that, Nqobile Madlala.